Hello, this is John Greiner with Basin Safety Training. This month we're going to be covering a few different topics. It's good to see you all here today. We're going to be covering short service employees, job safety analysis, stop work authority, and behavior/team-based safety. So there are 4 topics here. We go pretty in depth actually into these different topics. A lot of our customers and you, our participants, have been training with us for a while now, so we felt confident to go to the next level of really developing a positive safety culture. And these 4 topics go really well together to help build those safety cultures. So supervisors, a lot of this will fall on you to help lead and develop your teams. And we're going to start off this month with short service employees. So we're going to be covering a few different elements of a short service program, short service employee program rather, as well as identification of SSEs, how to categorize them, what safety training is required, job competency programs that are involved in SSE programs, accountability and mentorship, and once again, that falls on you, the supervisors, and metrics for success. So covered employees in the SSE program are typically employees that have been with a company for 180 days or less. Some companies have a 90-day policy, which in certain instances is perfectly fine, but it's very common that 180 days or 6 months is the time frame for an SSE. So the reason we do this are new employees that are coming on to a position or title or to a company. We want to make sure that they have all the tools necessary to be able to perform their job safely and effectively and aren't put into positions where a lack of knowledge could get them hurt. The majority of incidents in the workplace are actually caused by people who've been with a company less than 6 months. So we want to establish some baseline expectations for these new employees regarding the health and safety training, as well as, once again, their competency in their job. Also, we want to make sure that these employees have additional oversight and supervision. So once again, they don't make decisions that could put themselves or other employees that they're working with in harm's way. So there's a couple different ways to identify short service employees or SSEs. One typical way is just a green hard hat, most common in the oil field and construction industry. You can also use a different colored vest or a sticker on a hard hat, easy to remove, then you don't have to have a bunch of extra green hard hats laying around. So different companies will use different models of identifying their short service employees. So the goal obviously is to give an easy indicator of an employee or a group of employees that is new to the company, new to a position, and may need additional oversight and supervision, once again, from the supervisors. So there's a couple different types of SSEs. You have ones that are brand new to a company. Some of those may already have experience in the industry, and obviously they may require a little less supervision. In those cases, you can typically find a way to move their short service employee, move that ahead faster. So it doesn't have to be an entire 6 months. Let's say you bring a supervisor over from another company that becomes a supervisor in your company. It may be a little awkward for the supervisor to be walking around with a green hat, for example. Now, if you do move an employee through the process quicker, that's fine. You just have to make sure that they do complete all their required paperwork. The reason for their advancement is documented. It's very clear that this person does understand not just the job, but your company's requirements for that job. And if they've been rehired, that's another exemption. Typically, you can, if they went away, maybe went home for 6 months, take care of an ailing parent or loved one, and they come back, or if there was a downturn and you bring them back, a lot of times companies and individuals will ask me, hey, do we have to restart the SSE program, put them in the green hard hat? If they've already had the training required, once again, you want to make sure you put them through a refresher, give them some sort of exam to make sure that they remember all the pertinent details. But yes, they can be advanced through that process faster. Again, it needs to be documented, and the reason for their advancement clearly specified in that documentation. So as far as an effective program goes, it's not just having a list that you check off with people. There should be a list. Obviously, we do need that documentation, but the point here is to take an employee who's new to the industry and advance them as quickly as they're capable of being advanced, giving them the necessary safety information, tools, and equipment necessary so that they can, once again, be advanced and put themselves in safe positions and know when to ask questions if things aren't going well. A lot of you, including myself, when we first broke out in the oil field, we learned by, do it, watch me do it, and then you do it right afterwards. If you don't do it and you fail or you get hurt, well, that's on you. And it was, kind of a sink or swim situation. That's what a lot of us experienced. But, now we're seeing that isn't necessarily the most effective way to train and retain quality people. So there's a few different groups that need to be involved. You want the HR department to make sure they're bringing in qualified people who are a good fit for your company, the safety department to help train, and once again, understand these employees and make sure that they know what they're doing, operations departments to supervise them and once again train them effectively in their job scope so that they can be effective, and then quality assurance are really reviewing their skills on a consistent basis. All those four groups kind of work together to make sure that a new hire or an SSE is successful in their position. Another element of a quality SSE program is limiting the number of SSEs on a crew. Typically, you want 1 to 5 or 1 to 10. From 10 to 20% is kind of the maximum you want of new hires on a crew. That's not always possible or feasible, but that's really the goal. That way that individual knows the majority of people on that work site they can go to for help, instruction, etc. And another element, and kind of the final element, is that those individuals will have mentors assigned to them. So somebody is responsible for their success. And in our company, for example, we assign multiple mentors. Really anybody who's competent in their job can be a mentor or a trainer with specific tasks. And that's the goal, that, as people advance and are there for a long time, you can trust them because if you evaluated them, you can trust them to train the new hires in to be effective in their position as well. So integrating these, all these into an effective SSE program really include a lot of these elements. Training and mentorship kind of comes first, pretty straightforward. Making sure that the management is committed to the success of that program, and that goes with the rest of the programs we're going to be covering today. That there's clear job expectations for the procedures, how to do a job, that it's documented, they know, okay, this is the right way to do it, so they're not consistently changing the way that they're doing a job, affecting the quality and the consistency. Some form of recognition reward. Some companies, they give bonuses for safety. I'm not a huge fan of that, candidly, because doing the job safely is a core part of doing the job right, after all. However, doing the job right consistently and safely should have some sort of recognition, whether it's an award, you can give out gift cards, different things to incentivize people. But a lot of times in our case, what we do is, if someone does a really good job in the safety world and is an exemplary employee and leader, we have an award given to them. We have a pin that we give to them and really thank them for what they've been doing for us. So something that says, we see you, you're doing a good job. It's not a participation trophy. Not everybody should get one of these. So for you millennials out there, I'm sorry. No, I'm just joking. Last one is communication and feedback. So are we asking if our programs are working? This is an important part of the SSE program, is giving them a way to connect with us and say, hey, as I was training, this wasn't very clear to me. Could we improve on that for the next guy who's coming behind me? And those are all really elements necessary for a safety and quality excellent program. All right, so I mentioned there is a checklist. There should be a checklist. Here's an example of one that it's kind of a basic SSE checklist for most companies. When they first start off, you want to make sure they understand stop work authority. Our going to cover that shortly. Incident and accident reporting, who to call, what you're supposed to do after an accident occurs, what our safety responsibilities are, a drug and alcohol policy, working surfaces, making sure that work areas are clean, industrial hygiene, things of that nature. JSA training, how to properly fill one out. Oil field specific hazard training. So if you're on a drilling rig, if you're on a workover rig, roustabout, production facility, midstream pipeline, wherever you're working, that specifically at that job, at that site, with that equipment, what can go wrong for you and what to do in an emergency as well. Environmental responsibilities, how do we protect from spills impacting water, impacting the farmland around us, et cetera. How do we make sure we contain and prevent that? And if there is a spill, how do we report that? And once again, there's a lot of other elements to that. Hazard communication or chemical safety. What chemicals do you work with? How do you protect yourself from those? And H2S awareness, et cetera. So the list kind of goes on. Once again, these are just kind of required, first of all, but important elements to provide for our new hires so that they have all the right tools going into the field. And again, statistically, the personnel that have the most incidents in our industry are people that have been at the job for 6 months or less. So this isn't just a good idea. We've seen that people who don't have knowledge make worse decisions or don't make the right decision in critical times. They can't adapt well without training. So it's important to get them trained up as soon as possible. So kind of piggybacking off that is having an effective competency program, ensuring that policies and procedures and the way you want work done is clear and consistent. So typically these programs will identify core tasks to employees like, hey, I'm a roustabout, for example. So I'm responsible to change out dump valves or, fix recycle pumps, clean out tanks, whatever, your company has you doing. Well, is there a right way to change a dump and a wrong way to change a dump? If you've done it before, yes, there is. There's candidly, it's not just about right and wrong always. Sometimes it's about efficiency and effectiveness. Are we doing this as effectively and as efficiently as possible? So you want to have that outline for them, clear, written down, and then ultimately some sort of sign-off that they know how to do that job correctly. So once again, it's going to identify the proper method of doing that task, provides a sign-off. And advanced programs may even have a qualified section or a way to verify that individual can train the next employee that you hire on, which, again, I mentioned earlier, we have in our company. So if we have a level 1 technician that just got hired on, and I've trained and signed off on other level 1 technicians, even if they're not a level 2 yet, I want to know that that individual can effectively train the new person on the tasks that he does. And it is a little bit different, and most of us know this. There's a difference between knowing how to do a job and knowing how to explain it to somebody else. Why you do things a certain way, why this way is better than that way, versus just, well, I do it this way because someone told me to. That works until something goes wrong, and then that person, once again, may make the wrong decision as they're adapting. And also incorporates standard operating procedures, again, the right way to do something. Certain things, if you're shoveling rock, there may be 50 ways to do it. And depending, are you on a hillside? Is it flat ground? What kind of rock is it? What kind of shovel do you use? It may change. You may not need a standard operating procedure. In fact, you don't for every type of task. Some things, it just depends on the scenario. And other things, you want to make sure it's done right. It's important that our BOPs are built to a certain standard and specification. You don't want them, welding that together and being like, we could test those welds, but they look pretty good. No, you want those welds to be tested. You want to make sure that things are done consistently so that it's going to work when it's needed. All right, so I did build a job competency example. Some of you may have seen this before. Essentially, I'm taking a shop hand level 1, and he's a forklift. One of his tasks is driving a forklift with hazardous materials. So here's essentially, you have to identify, well, if he's moving around hazardous materials in our facility, like our facility has like an apartment complex across the street, we do have hazardous materials in our shop. It's important that that individual knows how to do that safely and isn't, just kind of running around the shop willy-nilly with a bunch of hazardous material. That's not a great look for a safety company. It's not a great look for any company. So ultimately, what does he need to know? And that's a question we had to ask ourselves. And then also, what do we need to train him to do it effectively and efficiently? Not just, make sure that no one dies. Obviously, that's a baseline. But then, how do we make sure he does it effectively? And can we train him to do that? And some people say, well, just hire experienced people. And yes, that is the best answer if you can find somebody with that experience. But ultimately, everybody has to get experience somewhere. And if you want to train people up and build them from the ground up, sometimes you need to hire people and train them yourselves. So, for example, here is an example of what our CQT looks like. You have, their name, their title, essentially when they got hired, when we expect them to be able to do the job correctly, and when we expect them to be able to train someone else. In this case, we've given the guy about a year to be able to learn his job before we expect him to be able to train someone else to do it effectively. So we give him a good period of time there, a grace period. So the core tasks or the critical tasks are identified. These are the 7 things this person needs to be able to do or training they need to have prior to, once again, being considered competent in their job. So each task has a sign-off for a competency level and a qualification level or a qualified level. and then each task has corresponding specifics. Let's look at that in the next slide here. So I'm taking just one of the tasks, once again, the materials handling or the forklift, and kind of breaking it down. So in this case, we reference our, I'm just kind of skipping ahead here, we reference our health and safety manual. So we do have a forklift safety program, all the requirements for the training that he needs. They need to understand our company's speed limit inside the shop of 5 miles per hour. The seatbelts are required always while operating that equipment, that they understand how to safely stack and prepare materials on pallets, which is a quality assurance level, and then also the limitations. So in this case, a level 1 individual isn't allowed to move hazmat. So we want that individual to at least have a year operating a forklift before we load him up with hazardous materials. And once again, maybe this individual shows extreme competency, or before he came to work for us, he worked at a place that already did this. So we may speed that up or consider him qualified quicker if he meets all the criteria. And that is kind of on a case-by-case basis. So these can be modified, that they're your documents. But even if this is done, on a legal pad, it doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't have to, be extremely professionally written. But having something where it's like, hey, these are your expectations. We want you to know these things or operate in this way, and then we're going to have you be signed off. So then once again, before we consider them qualified in that first year, we're going to ensure that they understand at a deeper level why those safety requirements are there, that they can verify quality expectations of the company. They know why we're doing it that way. Understands SOPs, and then make sure that they're followed. And then it can validate other people's capability. So typically if we don't have a new hire, then we'll use, I'll kind of be in the room, or a supervisor will be there with them and just kind of be the dummy, right? Like, hey, if I've never operated the forklift, show me. How do I do it? Okay, what if this happens? What do I do if that happens? How do we, adapt to this situation and see if they can answer those questions appropriately? And so essentially you're just taking the time to evaluate them, because if I see somebody, when we're younger, especially, you're 6 years old, you're driving up to a construction site, you see a guy in a Mini X or a dozer, you're looking up at that guy like he knows what he's doing. As you get older, you've seen people operate equipment who have no business operating that equipment, but they look good behind the wheel. Like, hey, that guy probably knows what he's doing. Not necessarily. So a lot of heavy equipment operations, especially accidents, happen because the individual wasn't properly trained. And he may think he's properly trained. He may say, man, I got 20 years of equipment operator experience, meaning he's mowed his grandparents' lawn with a push lawnmower for the last 20 years. Does not necessarily mean that he's qualified. So again, verifying not only that he can do the job, but do it effectively and to a quality level and a safe level as well. So accountability and mentorship, and this once again, it's kind of falling back on the supervisors. As supervisors, your job isn't just to make sure the job gets done. That's a major part of it. But there's another side of your job, which is making sure that the people that work for you are as good as they can be. Again, kind of going back to old school oil field, when I started out, some supervisors I worked with were great about sharing knowledge and information. They enjoyed it. Others, not so good. They just want to do their job and not really deal with you because you're an idiot and you don't know what you're doing yet, which is true. That, or, some people say, they're afraid of being replaced, or, they want to kind of box out their knowledge so other people aren't, as knowledgeable or as valuable as they are. But as a supervisor, really, we need to be not just looking out for the people that work for us, but also helping build them up and mentor them. And part of that is assessing them, coaching them, working with them, and developing them, correcting them as necessary. So there are some ways to metric or to kind of analyze the data for this. Having sign-offs is good. Kind of talking about with the other supervisors how people are doing, and validating how long it's taken them to learn things, etc. All right, so moving into the next topic is job safety analysis. I picked this photo for a specific purpose. I wasn't at this work site, but I'm assuming if I was out there and working with this individual who appears to be welding this building into place, I'm thinking that if he would have sat down and thought through this job and said, hey, what's the safest, most effective way to do this job? I don't know that this specific way of doing the job would have been his first choice, for example. Maybe he would have said, you know what? Maybe I need to move the man lift to the other side of the building to be able to reach this area rather than, oh, this is as far as it'll boom out. I guess I got to step out of it to reach over to the, I mean, candidly, I'm a little bit impressed. I mean, that's a heck of a straddle there. I don't know if I could do that without, I probably wouldn't even make that ladder. I'd just be done about halfway. I'd be down in that rebar nest down there. Ultimately, planning the job out and asking ourselves what can fail. And I'm looking at this like what can fail. A lot of things can fail. But asking ourselves that question will help us determine if it's the safest way to do the job, and then analyze how it's going to fail, and then make decisions to prevent that from happening. So that's really the purpose, is eliminate risk, prevent failures from happening, both from an operational level and then, yes, a safety level as well. So we're going to identify hazards, break the job down into tasks and basic steps, control measures, and then that we identify and then eliminate them or reduce them to the right level. And once again, this document, more so than the CQT and the training documents, although they are as well, they're legal documents. So once someone's been signed off to do something and evaluated, they're expected to consistently do the job to that level. If a JSA has been completed and it says that certain measures will be taken, it's expected that those measures will be taken. We've dealt with a lot of incidents over the years. OSHA's been involved in some of them. And if the individual has done a JSA and kind of written down what they're going to do correctly and didn't do it, sometimes they're denied, medical coverage, workforce safety and insurance, because they say, hey, this guy knew the right way but didn't do it. We're not going to pay for him. Maybe he's got an adrenaline streak and wanted to really live life on the edge. So there are some downsides to, improperly filling them out or filling them out and then not doing what you say you're going to do. So some more reasons we do the JSAs. Obviously, they focus on the worker, the task itself, the tools you have, and the work environment. And they are an ongoing process. You can stop. They can be revised. You may need to change them from time to time. Not always feasible, candidly, to do that, depending on the nature of the change. I mean, if the job changes completely, yes, it's time to stop and reevaluate, do a new JSA. For example, I've been out with crews before, and let's say a pipeline crew, and they were going to, lay the 4-inch in the ground. Okay, they had everything ready to go. They had their rigging up. The excavator was there, but then it was found that the bed wasn't flat where they wanted it to be, and there was going to be, a little bit of a hump in the pipe. So they had to go and remove that rock to flatten the bed out so that the pipe would lay correctly. That's a different job than they first intended to do. So they may have written a JSA for the first job, but not for the second job. So in that time, it'd be a time to reevaluate that JSA. Now, let's say that they were going to do that, but they found that the rigging wasn't proper and they had to wait, right? The job changed. They had, a plan and it changed. Do you need to stop and redo the JSA? And that's the question people ask. A lot of people would say, absolutely. Job changed, need to redo the JSA. To me, I don't know if that's always necessary. Once again, it really depends on the supervisors here to determine when that's required. And really, is it a change to the job or is it an adaptation? And we'll talk about ways to document that as well in a helpful manner here in a moment. So what is a hazard? Most of us know this. If you're a golfer like me, or really just not a good golfer, a hazard is where you spend all of your time on the course. But in this case, it's a potential for harm to an individual or really any inefficiency in the job. So if it can, or an incident, environmental release, really anything. So it's often associated with a condition or activity that if left uncontrolled would cause an injury, illness, or failure. And identifying them, eliminating them, or controlling them is really the function of what we're doing with the JSA. So how to identify them? I've a few simple questions in the next slide. I know I've covered this before, and I reiterate it over and over again. This is what I use when I go to the field. Like if I'm going to do something, I'm doing my job safety analysis, I have to install something at heights, or we have to rebuild something or fab something up or move some equipment in. I ask myself a few questions. The first one is, how can this go wrong? What could fail while I'm doing this job? evaluate it, think about it. You may think about it on your way to the job. You may just talk it through with your coworkers there. If that does happen, what are the consequences? Well, Billy gets hurt, or this is going to drop and be broken, or long term, this is going to fail if we don't install it correctly. So what can fail in this job? How could it happen? Are there any other contributing factors? Is there ice? Is there a piece of equipment that's not working correctly, etc.? Like, what other contributing factors are there? And then then there's two questions really, and I talk about it here a little bit, but now I get a little bit deeper. So when thinking about a hazard, you have to ask yourself, what's the likelihood of this hazard? And if the hazard turned into an incident, how severe would that incident be? And so our goal is everything to be on the low side of the equation. An example I like to use is, and I think I have this picture up here a little bit later, is let's say I have two ladders and I'm installing a piece of fascia board on a construction site, right? I'm going up to the window or the eave of the building and I'm installing some fascia. So I climb up the first ladder carrying the fascia board, go to install it, but can't quite reach where I need to. But I have the second ladder right here conveniently placed. So I step over to the second ladder to reach, where I'm trying to go to with that fascia, and then slide it into place. So 20 feet in the air, what's the likelihood I'm going to fall? Now, me personally, kind of a clumsy guy. The likelihood of me falling, extremely high. It's probably going to happen. Now, what's the severity? Carrying a fascia board, you got some weight that's going to fall on top of me, 20 feet up. Severity in that case, pretty high. I mean, if you look through the OSHA 300 history, or really the incident reviews that OSHA has online, you'll see a lot of people dying from falling. Sometimes, like literally walking down the street, they fall and they die. They hit their head just right, etc. Your body cannot take that much impact. And if you're a heavy person, over 200 pounds, which a lot of us guys are, it can be fatal, just falling from the same height. 1 foot, 2 foot, 3 foot back of a pickup truck. A lot of people die that way. Off of loading docks, 4 feet. Now you're talking 6, 10, 15, 20 feet. Severity, pretty serious. Some people survive. I mean, some people survive jumping out of airplanes and their parachute doesn't open, right? So there are miracles. I'm not saying there's not, but ultimately the severity is likely very high. So the goal is to minimize the likelihood and severity to absolutely as low as possible. Yes, we're in the oil field. Can we always eliminate every hazard? It's unlikely that we can do that. However, we want to minimize it to the greatest extent possible. Can we put up a barricade? In the ladder scenario, can I get a man lift? And if I change the tool, what happens to the likelihood of the accident? It's minimized significantly. Could I still fall out of the man lift? Yeah. Could the man lift tip over? It happens, yes. What's the likelihood of that? Extremely low. If I do fall, is the severity any less? Well, a 20-foot fall from a man lift or from a ladder is still a 20-foot fall. So what do? You tie yourself off in the man lift so you don't actually fall. Now, if you do fall out of the man lift still somehow, is it going to hurt? Are you going to be injured? Yes. If you fall out of a man lift, you're probably going to swing into it or the building or something. You're still probably going to suffer some injuries. But once again, the severity of those injuries are going to be low to medium. So the goal is to always ask yourself, first, what can fail? And then ask yourself, what's the likelihood of that failure, the severity of that failure, and then what tools, equipment, or change in process should I do to eliminate that or lower the likelihood. So knowing how severe an incident can be, a lot of times we can look at a historical context. Is there a lot of people that have been hurt doing this? Welding on tanks in the oil field, is there a history? Most of us don't need to look anything up. We just have heard the stories. Yes, welding on tanks can be dangerous. Working on a workover rig, unloading casing, drifting casing, throwing pipe, throwing chain. Are these things dangerous? Yes, they can be. So there's a historical context. And then present knowledge, looking at this instance from our knowledge of what we see in front of us right now, what is here right now, is there a likelihood that an incident or accident will happen? And then there's actually charts you can use for this. You can get really, really involved. And you can number them. Like here's a kind of a color rated scale from low to high. Sometimes they have it where lows are zeros, low and mediums are ones, mediums are two, medium highs are threes, and highs are fours. And then you number them based on, once again, impact and likelihood, or severity and likelihood. So that's when we make changes. Change into tools, process, addition of guards or barriers, addition of safety equipment. Well, we got a lot of, gas in here. Can we throw in a fan? It's dark where we're working. We can't see it. We're going to trip. Let's get some lighting over here. Gas detection, so that we know, levels of H2S or, lack of oxygen, etc. Fall protection, lanyards, man lifts, etc. All right, so completing a JSA, I'm actually going to have a fully written JSA in a little bit. We're just going to go through the structure of one right now quickly. So this is an example of one that we've created. It's our most recent version. The goal is to be as efficient with the JSA as possible. So right away, what tasks are the individuals doing? I'm going to write those in. Go ahead and put a line or an X through the safety equipment that's required. Kind of have the basics right there up front. Hard hat, safety footwear, safety glasses, FR clothing, air monitor, things that we typically wear on a daily basis. So you're going to mark those off. Any other hazards that we recognize before we start the job? Are we lifting overhead? Are we are there utilities around where we're working? And is that an issue? Is there inadequate lighting? Are we going to be doing some heavy lifting? What are we going to be doing? You kind of mark those. In this case, we have the ability to add some things in as well. So wind speed direction, kind of knowing some weather things, some contributing factors. If it's minus 40 out, it changes the nature of the job. Fortunately, we're not there right now. It's beautiful out here in March, but ultimately, weather has an impact, or even if it's really hot. And then lastly, if there's other contractors on site, we want to identify that and make sure that they are on the JSA as well. Then we get into the actually job step portion of it, the hazard analysis portion, and the elimination portion. So you're going to write out your basic job steps, what you're doing, be specific. You don't have to, and sometimes when people train this, they get really involved. I've seen JSA trainings where you're making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and they've got 15 steps to it. I think that's good for effect. Like, hey, you can, if you want to, you can break down a job very, very, to very, very minute details. My recommendation is really ask what are the basic steps and where can it fail? Don't get out of control, right? Because you could make getting out of a pickup a whole JSA. Park the pickup, make sure it's backed in, put it into park, unbuckle seatbelt, turn ignition off, open door, step out slowly so you don't, step on a piece of scoria, hold the handle as you step out with the other foot, or hold the seat, step back, close the door, don't slam your hand if it's windy. I mean, you can get at it, and then you're spending 3 hours in paperwork before you even start doing the job. For a fact, and you'll see, I'm all about thorough JSAs, and you'll see that in a little bit here. However, I'm also about analyzing actual risk. Like, could you get hurt stepping out of your vehicle? It could happen. It's happened before. What's the likelihood? What's the severity? Once again, these are the questions you have to ask yourself. So we have the sequence of basic job steps. I recommend numbering them. If your JSA doesn't have that and you'd like it, definitely let us know. We've got a lot of different templates, but basically numbering it so you can use multiple lines if you don't have enough space. There should be no more than 5 tasks. Typically, up to 10. If it's a whole procedure and it's extremely in depth, you may want to consider having an SOP for that job and then referencing it. Once again, you'd go over the JSA the procedure during the JSA. But once again, if you have to write, 10 pages, maybe it's a little bit more advanced than just a JSA is going to cover. And then group similar tasks to eliminate repetition of hazards. For example, if I have to lift, a 4-inch piece of pipe and a 2-inch piece of pipe, maybe I don't need to write those, even though they're different, they are different weights. Maybe you need 2 people for one task, one person for the other task. Can I put them, or is the risk the same? Yeah, back strain, etc. We may need to use a forklift or something to lift the pipe up, etc. Every situation's different. I'm just giving you some tools to maybe simplify the process. If the hazards and the likelihood of severity and the controls are similar, sometimes they can be grouped. Still identify them both, but you can't group them together. So identifying the hazards, I kind of gave you some steps to do that earlier, some tips to do that, and make them specific. Slips, trips, falls is written a lot of times here. Slips, trips, falls. I'm doing this job, I could slip, trip, fall. And you can literally put that on anything, because if you're moving your feet from one place to the other, slip, trip, fall is a very real possibility. But be specific. Slip, trip, fall on scoria. Slip, trip, fall on excess, matting over here, or an icy liner inside the berms, whatever. Be specific about what you're going to slip, trip, fall on, not just slips, trips, falls. For example, back strains from lifting, cuts from burrs on hammer unions, tripping over hoses, flying debris caused by high wind, walking hazards caused by scoria. Once again, be specific to the task that you're working on. And then elimination should you should find a way to control or eliminate a hazard. You can substitute as well, typically with chemicals, but this is really what we want to be doing. So a PPE is not a control. PPE, however, can be a hazard in certain instances. A hard hat without a strap under it on top of a tank with high winds can itself be a hazard. So you want to identify whatever could fail during that job. You want to make sure you identify that. So then there's an optional side of this, and I'll go over this a little bit later as well with the completed JSA. But one thing I'm really recommending for all of our participants in our courses and all of our customers is reviewing their JSA at the end of the day. Sometimes safety personnel will do this at the end of the quarter or the end of the week, make some notes, give it back to the supervisors, and they'll look over it. But by that time, 24 hours have passed, 7 days have passed. People are not in the mindset of what they were doing during that job. So what we're recommending is including, and this is completely optional obviously, but including a review portion to that JSA. So you flip it over, you talk about anything that changed during the day. For example, I mentioned earlier, we had to change out rigging. Well, that would be an adaptation. Like, you didn't know that at the beginning, maybe overnight, like a dog came out to a location, you chewed up your rigging. I don't know, something changed about the job. And you didn't know that when you got out there. So the job changes slightly. You write it down that there was an adaptation. That way you can document, things that you're consistently seeing as adaptations. I don't know about you, but it's very rare that 7 a.m. as I'm doing the JSA, I write out everything, and then at the end of the day, I had a crystal ball, and everything I anticipated is exactly what happened that day. It's very rare. There's typically some form of adaptation. And you'll see this later. You don't have to be extremely thorough, but marking that is important. And then also in that, we've kind of incorporated in our form that we have internally a lot of the behavior-based safety data that we'll cover a little bit later right there in the JSA form. So it's quick. You can track a lot of the information and get points for what you're doing well. If you're wearing your PPE, if you're communicating well as a crew, if you're stopping work where necessary, you're getting points for that. And then things that didn't go so well, you have a way to capture that data and then talk about it at the end of each day. People need to be coached. Somebody needs additional training. The process didn't go as smooth as it could have because we weren't prepared. You can note that and then document it and talk about it. All right, so moving into the next topic, stop work authority. A lot of us have been through this before, and this is the image. You may remember this from a couple minutes ago. I took this picture with a BlackBerry back in the day. It's about how long ago it was. But there was this individual. I came to know him. His name is Noah. He's from Tennessee. Nice guy. He was installing the fascia board. So he went up the one ladder, and you may have seen this before. Slid the fascia into the frame there, or the window. Couldn't get it all the way to the peak there, so stepped over to his second ladder, which is uneven, by the way, not even, as you can note there, and slipped it into place. Miraculously, came down from that ladder. You can see the guy there at the bottom staring up at him like, "Whoa, what is this guy doing?" Impressive feat of acrobaticism, if you ask me. I don't think I said that right, but acrobatics, I think, is actually correct. So impressive. However, extremely dangerous. What's the likelihood that this guy's going to fall? Maybe not this time, eventually, doing the job this way. Extremely light. And as you can see, he has multiple other windows there to put the board on. Eventually, there will be some incident that occurs. It's just statistics. You can't do something this dangerous, that requires this much, tedium and carefulness consistently without there being some sort of incident. Gust of wind, a ladder that's not perfectly stable, slippery, sweaty hands, right? Like any number of basic simple things could turn this into a disaster. And there was rebar sticking up directly below where he was working as well. So had he fallen, it wasn't just a fall to the ground. It was a pretty serious situation there. So once again, him asking himself, what could fail today doing this job this way? Would have been a good question to ask. And then, so for me, I did stop work. I said, hey man, you can't be doing stuff like that. Like, you're going to fall. And, he didn't listen to me. He kind of kept, I did my part, because I'd rather have an uncomfortable conversation, and I was respectful, but have an uncomfortable conversation where the guy maybe think I'm an idiot or, well, that guy's a wuss, whatever, rather than seeing that, not saying something, and then come to find out that he got hurt seriously. So I'd rather not regret that situation. So this is a good stop work. If this was me and my crew and I saw that guy up there, that'd be a near miss. There'd be a retraining situation. There'd be a lot going on with that. So why stop work? Obviously to protect somebody from imminent danger to themselves or others. That's really, the main purpose of stopping work. Who can stop work? I definitely did not have authority on that job site. I was across the street training in like a civic building in Tioga. I did not have authority to walk over there necessarily and stop the work. I just felt, and like I said, he probably did think, I ended up meeting him years later actually. And, showed him the picture. I was like, man, I bet you like 5 years ago when you were building this thing in Tioga, and we all had a good laugh. So ultimately, didn't hate me forever, but he probably thought I was not the coolest guy in the world. But really, anyone can stop work on any job site at any time for any reason. As a safety guy, I once again felt my obligation. You probably wouldn't have to in that situation, but really anybody can. As it's important that they kind of understand the nature and the function of that they have had some sort of training, but anyone can stop the job at any time. Imminent danger, really it's our right to stop the work. It's also a responsibility to stop the work. If you know that something's going to go wrong, trust me, you don't want to be in a situation where you didn't say something and you should have. And almost every incident that I've been involved in where somebody got seriously hurt or injured, there was somebody there who knew, like to some extent, that them doing the job that way wasn't the best way, but they just let it happen anyway, and they regret it for a long time that they didn't stop it or say, hey guys, let's reassess, let's reevaluate and do this differently. So how to stop work, pretty basic. You're going to approach the individual or the personnel that you see performing the work that's unsafe or not satisfactory and say, hey, we need to stop work. You're in imminent danger, or this job's going to fail because of this. Can you please stop? And essentially, they should be stopping at that point. They don't always stop, and we'll talk about that here in a moment of what to do in that instance. But once again, specifically, this is going to fail because you need fall protection to work at this height. This excavation, you need some shoring or some sort of trench protection. There's an ignition source too close here. We got a bunch of stuff over here. It's going to light on fire. The system's not been locked out, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of different reasons to stop work. And essentially, you have the right and authority, so always be on lookout for, what may be going wrong on the work site, even if it's not your company performing the work. I'm once again not expecting you to be the concerned citizen like myself, just walking up to random people in Tioga, but ultimately definitely on your job sites, so don't worry. I don't expect everyone to be quite as insane as I am. So after the stop work authority is issued, once again, I said, we hope that the person stops. So they're supposed to stop, essentially reassess, gather together. If they don't stop, definitely let someone know, hey man, like I told this guy that that's not the right way to do it. We may want to get someone with a little bit more clout over here that he's going to listen to, have him stop this work. And then obviously you go from there. Informal stop work is another essentially challenge. If let's say, guys are backing in a trailer and they're about to run into containment or the pumping in for goodness sakes, and you stop them, it's officially a stop work. Are we going to call the entire well site together? Are we going to, shut everybody down, call the company man in, get supervisors and safety people on the phone? Probably not. It's okay in certain instances where you just say, hey man, stop, like that's far enough. You're too close, or, hey, too far. It's okay to do that, adjust the work, and then continue working, depending on what it is. Still can be documented, and we'll look at ways that can be done here in the next next part of our presentation. But yes, there is such a thing as informal stop work. So if someone asks you to stop work, definitely stop the work. Try to figure out what's going on. They may be wrong, and you're doing it perfectly safe, and they had it incorrect. We don't want to retaliate against those people. You may give them a little bit of an elbow nudge, at lunchtime or whatever, like, hey man, stop, that turkey sandwich is going to get you. But ultimately, we want to encourage it, even if somebody does unintentionally misuse it, or unintentionally use it, unless they're misusing it. So restarting work, depending on the nature and the severity of that stop work, typically if it is kind of more serious, then you want the supervisor to have assessed the situation, maybe looked at the JSA before you go ahead and make the change. So once again, use stop work when necessary. Don't use it improperly. Don't abuse it, and then report those things. And I'll give you a way to do that relatively simply here in a moment. All right, so getting into behavior-based safety. So why do we do behavior-based safety? A few different reasons. Basically, our goal is to identify potentially hazardous and inefficient behaviors in the workplace, identifying safe behaviors versus unsafe behaviors. And to kind of draw a contrast here between hazard IDs and behavior-based safety, I'm going to kind of use this table here. So if you have a guy that you work with, say his name's Billy, and he's the guy that is, his truck is always a nightmare. I mean, you get in, there's filet of fish, cartons, spilling out onto the sidewalk. He's got Coke bottles in there, snuff cans all over, that guy, right? Untidiness in itself, it's a behavior, but tools strewn across the workplace or just stuff all over the work floor where you're working, that's a hazard ID. There's stuff everywhere. This is going to hurt somebody. Untidiness, however, the behavior can lead to the hazard of, unclean work area. They could potentially cause a trip hazard, something falling on somebody, etc. Some more behaviors here: failure to listen to instructions, not following SOPs, angry emotional reactions to coaching, rushing, or lagging in operations. Like, some things require a specific pace, and you can rush in operations as well, like go too fast, but there is a proper pace to a lot of jobs. Improper missing procedures would be a hazard ID, versus not following procedures, which would be a behavior. And I can, hopefully you can see that contrast there. Tools and equipment not working properly, high pressure would be a hazard ID. Poor work layout, plan, or design. We see this on some oil field locations where you got water trucks coming and oil trucks coming, and it's just a compact nightmare. Plus you get ice and snow or rainwater, mud in the mix. It's unsafe to be driving and walking through that location with all that stuff happening. And then God forbid there's a workover rig that comes out. I mean, things can get ugly pretty quick. And then also, or missing safety equipment. These would all be hazard IDs versus behavior. So once again, drawing that contrast and giving you some context there. So it is a process that helps us understand safe behaviors versus unsafe behaviors. Delving into this, ultimately our goal is to understand why unsafe behaviors are happening. Is it a personal preference? Is it lack of training? Is it lack of coaching? Do you not have procedures, etc.? Like, what's the reason for the improper behavior? So we look at three measurable components: the worker, the environment, and the worker's behavior. All three of these things together. And that's kind of how we evaluate behavior-based safety programs. So the worker, we're going to look at their capabilities physically, mentally, the worker's experience level, how much training they've had, their ability to manage criticism and instructions, and their ability to adapt. Some people, you give them a task and everything's roses, they do great. You throw a wrench in there and the whole thing comes apart. And that's a behavioral, a learned, or just kind of a habit tendency. The environment, we're going to look at existing or potential engineering controls, equipment, job work tasks, where you stand during a job, etc. All these sorts of things. kind of come into play, as well as the workplace culture. And the worker's behavior. It's defined as the way in which one acts or conducts oneself towards others, the way in which a person acts in response to a particular situation or stimulus, as I mentioned before. And so, that person's behavior on the job is going to be affected by a lot of different things. Some you have control over, some you don't. So the behavior-based safety and team-based safety process, I'm going to draw another contrast here. Both of them have the components of observation and feedback, a formal review of the observation data, improvement goals that are built off of that data, and then positive reinforcement, and then ultimately achievement goals, like, hey, how do we enforce the good behavior versus the bad behavior? A lot of times the behavior-based system is managed by individuals, sometimes supervisors, sometimes not, overseeing and assessing the behavior of their coworkers or their subordinates, documenting it, and sharing it with management, HR, supervisors, wherever. They're recorded, and then the team that gets that data looks through it, maybe does an investigation, makes decisions, and then implements changes to the work, or it changes the training, etc. So it's individuals assessing individuals. So another model that gets all the data that we're looking for, but kind of takes a different approach, I call it team-based safety. And that's where, as a team, we're working together to evaluate our work together as a team. Now, this is difficult for people who work by themselves. It's difficult to be like, all right, go team, go. It's kind of like being the valedictorian in your homeschool class, right? Just doesn't have a lot of value. But on a crew level especially, workers observe the crews and discuss improvements. My encouragement is on a daily basis. Observations are recorded at the end of each shift rather than just randomly when we find time. Specific tasks and behaviors are assessed and discussed, and then changes should be reflected on the following day's JSAs. All right, so we're going to kind of bring it all together here, look over a JSA and then the review process together, kind of see how we can blend a lot of these things into one program that's simple and easy to use and can be captured on a daily basis. So here we have a JSA plan. We have 3-member crew, leveling rock and staging oil piping on a well site. It's probably a roustabout type crew. I know not all of us are roustabouts, but just kind of give an example. So we have A, B, and C, sequence of basic job steps, potential risks or hazards and failures, and actions taken to reduce risk, hazard, or failure. So, task 1, unload skid steer near east side of tank battery between tanks and treater. So some hazards, we have personnel in the way, and I've numbered them here. Skid steer rolling off of trailer if not level, not enough room for safe unloading, and loose scoria may cause trip hazard. So these are our issues. So in number 1, kind of categorized with C and B here. Actions taken for number 1, ensure personnel are clear of trailer ramps. Number 2, ensure trailer is level. Number 3, ensure trailer is parked so equipment has room to be unloaded. And number 4, watch footing while de-rigging skid steer. Now, you may not always have room to write all this stuff, and I recognize that. It doesn't have to be super professional. For the example here, I'm being very thorough, kind of using some professional language. But once again, as long as it's understandable, you're discussing it. The main part is the discussing and making sure that everybody's on the same page. But I'm okay with some shorthand as long as we're actually discussing the actual hazards. So number 2, move trailer truck in front of tank and battery. Personnel may be in the way. So in that case, make sure all personnel are clear of truck prior to moving it. Number 3, complete equipment inspection and begin back scraping rock so it's level and even. Here we have personnel in the line of fire of equipment moving. So in managing that hazard, ensure personnel are wearing vests and stay clear / maintain eye contact with operators. That's what we're going to do, right? You could put, use hand signals, etc., whatever kind of your method is for managing that. So moving excess rock to pile on west side of location. Once again, we're going to be using the skid steer for that. So here I have same as above for the hazard, and then for the management, same as above. And then also excess speed could spill rock, so drive slowly and carefully. So, if different tasks have similar hazards, there's no reason to rewrite the same thing. And you can say see above, you can draw an arrow, whatever you want to do, as long as, once again, you're discussing these things. Moving excess rock, I already went over 4, stack old pipes, equipment near south of edge of location, and then load skid steer back on trailer and secure properly. Hazards there, we have back strain from heavy or longer piping. So for that, we're going to use team lift or skid steer if piping is too heavy to lift. And then you may get cuts from rusted iron, so use cut-resistant gloves during process. For loading skid steer, same as above. Once again, personnel in line of fire, so I have 3 Task 3, B1, referencing that. Equipment could slip off ramps if ramps aren't stable, and improper rigging could result in load shifting during travel. So some management, same as above, or some mitigation, same as above for the first hazard. Ensure trailer and ramps are stable for the second. And then number 3, only qualified riggers should rig equipment and trailer. So that's our plan. It's how we're going to do the job, what hazards or failures we see that could potentially happen, and then actions we're going to take to reduce the likelihood of those things happening. All right, so we did the JSA. That was 7 a.m. Now we're at 5 p.m. We're assessing the job. We got the crew back together. We're near the muster point. We're ready to go home. We're going to spend 5 to 10 minutes, kind of look over how the day went. And that's the review portion that I was kind of talking about earlier. I'm not going to go super in depth here, but essentially we've identified task 1, 3, 4, and 6 where there was some adaptation or positive thing that we want to identify. So just going through a couple of these here. So plan number 1, we were going to unload skid steer near east side of tank battery between tanks and treater. That was our plan. However, we had an adaptation. The skid steer was intended to go there, but when we got over there, the ground was soft, and once we backed the trailer in, it started to sink because of recent snow melt. So we stopped the work. Supervisor decided we're going to unload it over, by the pumping unit instead. Now that's a change to the job scope, but the hazard of unloading the trailer didn't change. We still needed adequate room. The trailer still needed to be level, and we needed to keep people out of the way, as you remember from earlier. So once again, do you need to stop and revise the JSA? You could, but once again, we're not seeing a significant change in the hazard or the job task, right? We're just changing the location. So I have some other categories here, some near misses, positive observations, and hazard IDs. You'll notice that there's 3 on the hazard IDs, 4 on the positive, and 1 in the near miss. We're going to go over that on the next slide. I can't bounce back and forth between slides, so just remember those for the next slide here as we go through it. So task number 3, complete equipment inspection and begin back scraping rock so it's level and even. We had an adaptation. Rock was slightly still frozen together and needed to be chipped by hand prior to leveling by skid steer. Entire crew worked together positively and wore necessarily gloves and glasses. Equipment inspection also completed. So we're giving ourselves some positive observations here. Crew worked together. There's some communication. Everyone was wearing their PPE, their gloves, their glasses. We did our equipment inspection. Those are all positive. So this step, even though it has an adaptation, has some positive observations to it. Now, usually we wouldn't even second think that. We're like, it's hard to move this rock right here. Let's chip it up, with some shovels here real quick, get out. And no one would think about it again. This is a way for us to actually assess this. So tomorrow, or, the next day when we come back to work, the ground's frozen again, or the rocks are still frozen. When we're planning it, we're like, hey, make sure that, we can actually move the rock with the skid steer before we start moving things. Once again, this is an example, maybe a terrible one, but just an example of why the review is helpful. Task number 4, there was no adaptation, but someone noticed that operators wearing safety equipment and hearing protection worked efficiently. So hey, we're giving that guy kudos. We give him some positive observations there. And then lastly, load skid steer back on trailer and secure properly. We had an adaptation. The skid steer was rigged by an SSE who was instructed properly in task, but showed to not be competent in the task. Supervisor inspected his work and determined that additional training was required. Then he had to re-rig the skid steer and train the SSE on proper rigging technique. So we had a near miss there. If we'd have left the skid steer loaded the way it was, we'd have had problems down the road. We had some positive observations. Work was stopped, etc. And then we have some hazard IDs there. There's 5 to that: C, D, E, F, J. So where do I get those letters from? You'll see that right here. So C, D, E, F, J, we have efficiency. On the crew performance improvements, we have efficiency issues. D, additional training necessary. E, repeat instructions, because as it said, he knew, but he just didn't do it right. F, lack of understanding, because he didn't do it right. And then J, we have operations flow. So we slowed down our operations. We had to redo an entire task. Not that it's, huge deal, but we had to redo an entire task, which slowed us down because that individual didn't do the job correctly. So we're capturing that data here. Now, the reason the second section, so there's 2 sections to this, the crew performance positives and the crew performance improvements in our hazard IDs. The reason that there's 2 sections is we want to give kudos to the positives and then also recognize where we can improve, right? The positives are not lettered because typically positives at this time aren't categorized. It's just general positive. We have positive things, great. So we want that number to be high. We want to recognize the things that we're doing correctly as a part of our job. And the improvements in hazard IDs, yes, we want this number to be low, but we also want to recognize where we can improve. So we have some operational flow issues, some of these other ones. That was in the first task where we identified an additional hazard. The ground was soft where we intended to unload the skid steer. Boom, new hazard, we had to adapt. Okay, that's an item that we recognize as an issue. So we have 9 crew performance improvement issues or hazard IDs that we saw, and then we have a couple near misses that we're explaining down there at the bottom. Equipment was almost unloaded on soft ground, potentially causing stuck vehicle and unsafe loading. And the second one, crew member did not properly rig skid steer. So 2 near misses. So we got a lot of data from some basic tasks, which is, ultimately a lot of our customers want data. Safety people use this data to make decisions about training, etc. So that's why it's valuable. All right, so kind of see with the point of review. Typically, they shouldn't take more than 10 or 15 minutes. That's one way to collect behavior-based safety data or through a team-based safety model. Now, there's other ways you can have just like as I mentioned, a sheet that an individual fills out, identifying behaviors, capture that data, and share it as well. It's additional paperwork, etc., but there's multiple ways to get the data. I like the team-based model, but leave it up to you and your company. So observation and feedback should be direct. A routine task should be observed. It shouldn't just be stuff that we do randomly. And then we should obviously provide positive feedback as well, which is what the review. Hopefully see some improvements. And the next slide kind of talked about goals a little bit, and I'll talk about that here at the end. So reinforcement, management level, really at the management level, companies really need to own this. And once again, that's the supervisory level, right? You supervisors really are the leaders in the field for safety. Safety guys, we're good resources. We can help encourage and coach, but we're not watching the guys work every day, all the time. That's what supervisors are doing. So if you guys are and are really focused on your crews working safely, working together as a team to be efficient, and then talking about when we don't do a good job and encouraging when we do, that's what's going to make the change. That's what's really going to make our industry safe. And at the worker level, shouldn't discourage this, be down about it. Oh, the stupid safety stuff, blah, blah, blah. It's easy to get down about it, but candidly, there are efficient ways to do it. If something is completely inefficient, it should be reviewed and figure out, hey, how can we do this better? And that's something that we're always trying to do. And then once again, workers leading by example. So the results here, the goal is to create a workplace that's more efficient, more productive. We have positive morale, profitability, and a safer workplace driven by data. And this helps us build goals as well, like areas we need to improve in, whether it's training programs, how consistently we're doing meetings, the quality of the JSAs, whether or not people are competent in their jobs, etc. We're going to get a lot of that data from the behavior-based safety program. Once again, there's different ways to collect that data. Highly encourage you as a company and you as an individual to think it through and say, hey, how do we get this data? And ultimately the goal is to change things. And at that, I'm going to leave you with one example as we wrap up here. Imagine your parking lot at your workplace is just full of ice, or on location. It's just iced over completely, middle of winter. And no one does anything about it. And people are walking across the ice all day, every day, 20 people, 30 people, 50 people across location. Eventually, statistically, someone's going to trip and fall. And how many trips and falls until one of those people gets seriously hurt? Lands on a wrist, lands on their hip, etc., an elbow, breaks something. 100 people, 500 people, 600 people. How many trips across the ice until somebody falls and slips and hurts themselves seriously? But if one person says, hey, you know what? Crap, there's ice everywhere here. We need to get some matting. We need to get some dirt brought in, some salt brought in where we're going to be walking. On location, I know it's not easy. Maybe get some spikes on your shoes, whatever. Like, we need to change something to prevent that. So if I have salt now laid down across the ice in my parking lot or on the work site, or everyone's wearing ice cleats, what does that do to the likelihood of somebody getting hurt? It's going to significantly reduce it. So the first person that notes, hey, we got an icy workplace and we're slipping all over the place, if the quicker we can get that data to somebody who can make a decision about it, the quicker that we can add or change a process, equipment, safety, PPE, salt, whatever we need to do to change the situation to eliminate other people from experiencing that, because it is a statistics game. The more near misses, the more the more opportunities for incidents to occur, the higher likelihood that it's going to happen. So we want to eliminate that together, and that's a team effort. All right, well, this month's a little bit longer. Appreciate you guys sticking it out with me. Have a great month. I'll see you guys next month in April, and I'll look forward to it. Thank you very much. Have a great day.